My little puzzle here. Words just that would be me.
Well, again, it's my pleasure to introduce our second panel for today. The panel topic is the MLS still relevant for academic libraries? Moderator for today is Jean Ferguson. Jean is the head of research services at Duke University Libraries. Our panelists from left to right are Carol Hunter, who's the Associate University Librarian for Collections and Services at UNC Libraries. Greg Raschke, who's the Associate Director for Collections and Scholar Communications at NCSU Libraries. And finally, Molly Tamarkin, who's the Associate University Librarian for Information Technology at Duke University Libraries. With that, I'll turn it over to Jean.
Great. Can you hear me okay? Ooh, might be too loud. So I'm just going to open up with our topic, with our question here, and start here with Carol. Is MLS still relevant for academic libraries?
Nothing like opening the floor. Well, it's a very timely and quite hot topic, so I'm glad to really address it. I'm actually very interested in this topic. I have written a few remarks that I'd like to share with you, and we can jump off from here as we go along. So first, I would like to reframe the question just a bit, as James Mullins from Purdue articulated in a recent report in the Journal of Library Administration. And some of you might have seen that. And that is, are research university libraries identifying and hiring librarians with knowledge of and interest in the new roles expected of research university librarians? And so then I'd ask, well, what are these new roles required to serve the academy now and in the foreseeable future? Well, I'd say they are practical and they're theoretical. They marry traditional disciplines with new tools and methods in course development, in teaching, and research. They are ambiguous while opportunistic, and they are collaborative. And maybe most importantly, they include deep discipline. They include language expertise, systems analysis, user interface design, metadata architecture, information and data management, data mining. Just examples, you could go on. And a few concrete examples that were highlighted in the Chronicle of Education last month, I think kind of gives sort of the picture of what I'm trying to say here. The UVA Scholars Lab offers a digital boot camp for grad students in humanities. It's called the Praxis Program, if you all have seen it. And in that program, they say, our goal is to provide a small team of graduate students with soup to nuts training in software development for humanities research and exchange. Along the way, they will gain hands-on experience in knowledge representation and design, the most fundamental formal activities underlying the production of digital scholarship. It's pretty geeky stuff. But our students also exercise so-called softer skills. They learn to collaborate effectively across disciplinary borders and class lines in the academy and with practitioners from profoundly different intellectual traditions. They plan and manage projects with aggressive timelines, complex moving parts, and personnel who are also peers, including not only fellow students but librarians and information technology professionals. And they hone their ability to communicate to scholars, to potential supporters, and to a broad and public audience. That's one. The second is a video wall, which is part of the new Learning Commons at Johns Hopkins. Duke has one as well. A big screen research, if you will. It is intended for research and multi-user gestural interaction with extremely large imagery or data sets. More and more goes on in the virtual world, and people are just staring at screens, says Gregory D. Hatter, a professor of computer science and chair of the department at Johns Hopkins, who's working actually on this wall together with library officials. It's sort of a fracturing process. As more and more educational content is available online, he argues, the university needs to pay attention to the benefits of collaborative work on campus. It's about people interacting with people, building the community of scholars. So these two examples for me give life to some of the concepts that are outlined in Think Like a Startup. It's a white paper to inspire library entrepreneurialism by Brian Matthews. If you know him, he's the Associate Dean for Learning and Outreach at Virginia Tech. Being strategic, he says in this white paper, should be about pushing the boundaries. Instead, you are more likely to see something like embed information literacy into the curriculum, rather than build a curriculum to prepare students for 21st century literacies. Stretching, not sustaining. That's mine. A strategic instructional venture isn't about just training students how to search database interfaces, but about building their fluency with data, visual, spatial, media, information and technology literacies. This is how we can advance the role of the library. This is how we transform scholarship. So, that being my intro, back to the question that you asked. Is the MLS relevant for academic library positions? Yes, but I'd say with certain qualifications. I think it can be and is for those MLS graduates from LIS schools that are tracking the needs and anticipating the needs of the academy. So it's about the academy for me. And it can't end with the MLS, nor can the MLS completely address all the needs in the changing landscape, I would posit. We need hybrid professionals, academic specialized with library expertise. CLEAR is addressing the need for sound data management practice throughout the academy by helping to produce the professional capacity to handle it. They have these fellows who will be scholarly practitioners who understand not only the nature and processes of their own disciplines, but also how research data is organized, transmitted, and manipulated. Our work. The CALA program at UNC Chapel Hill Library addresses the development of those critical on-the-job competencies that expand, enrich, and give meaning to the theoretical. It enhances the graduate experience and it introduces students to key issues in academic librarianship and to the culture of the profession. I think we have an opportunity here to stretch rather than just sustain as well, to develop those skills in our future graduates that will advance the role of the library and transform scholarship.
Carol and I have done, I think, 3 panels in the last 18 months, and she's always much, much better prepared than I am. She does research, quotes, unbelievable.
That's because I don't want to tell you what I really think. No.
So I'll just say, I mean, I think, so is the MLS still relevant for academic library positions? Sure, as a one-word answer, I think it is. I'm gonna.
Don't worry, I'm coming.
Well, you can see the level. She's got 10 pages, I've got 1, and Molly's got this, so we're gonna see how we do. So, I mean, I think it's still a strong form of credentialing, right? You see it in job ads a lot. It's a requirement in a lot of academic library positions. I think it still is a sort of robust form of credentialing. So, but I think to make it more interesting for this conversation, you have to change the question. So, one is what you learn in getting the MLS, and what do you combine with the MLS in terms of skill sets. I think is a lot more interesting than whether the MLS is relevant. It's who can compete coming out with their MLSs, and what kind of jobs can they get, and who's going to be the most competitive in the job market. It's a lot more interesting than whether or not the MLS is relevant, because I think it still is pretty strongly. So too many graduates, right, for academic libraries with backgrounds in special collections. I think we're seeing, like 10 years ago, the big push for unique, rare special collections, which I still think is very important, but we're sort of overproducing in that area. Library schools tend to trail what research libraries are really interested in by like 5 to 7 years, and I think you're seeing that, right? So there's like a flood in the market. I mean, that's particularly true here because a lot of people want to stay here in the Triangle, and there's such a strong program at this institution here. We still have too many generalists in the humanities, right, that are being graduating with the job market declining and the number of librarians being hired. That's really becoming a problem. So those are becoming issues. And we need more graduates who are versed in digital technologies, computer programming, things like that. And I don't think it stops there. But I mean, if you are a librarian developer, or a librarian who can program, regardless of what your background is, right? We have English majors, we have 2 English majors who are librarian developers in our organization who could pretty much write their own tickets. I think that's going to be true for the foreseeable future. And those who can blend robust technology skills with other areas are going to be really valuable. I think you'll see even stronger pushes again for more advanced degrees, PhDs, things like that, people who can work with scholars across the research life cycle. And in order to do that, you're going to have some level of credibility, a master's or a PhD to do some of that kind of stuff. People with web skills, user experience kind of things, all of those areas are going to be important. So the generalist era, I think, is been fading for a while, and it's just being expedited here between the economy and the growth of digital technologies and libraries. So you're going to have less positions, but they're going to be higher paid and higher skilled, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. It might be if you're in library school right now, depending on how you're positioned, but I think overall for the profession, I think that's going to be it's going to be a good thing in the longer run. So the other sort of change in the question is the ratio of MLS credentialed professionals that we incorporate other professionals with other backgrounds, right? So I think the MLS is still very relevant, but within the organization, you're going to see, we've seen this, and I'm talking, some relatively small percentage, but I think I looked at this, at least 7 to 10% of our professionals don't necessarily have library degrees, or they have other backgrounds. We have an architect now on our staff, we have a communications and PR person, on our staff. We have different variety of backgrounds. People who are just computer programmers can come right into libraries. Digital humanists, right, who don't go into the academy in terms of professorial positions will probably come into libraries more and more. So I think if you twist the question, it gets a lot more interesting. And I'll save. I have some more comments, but I'll save them for the future questions.
Okay, thank you. So the question.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Is the MLS still relevant for academic library positions?
So when I heard that question, when I read that, I focused on the word still. Because I feel like I've been waiting 22 years since I graduated from library school to speak on this topic. And at the time when I went to library school, I worked in libraries for 8 years. Yet my curriculum was exactly the same walking in the doors if I'd never worked in a library. So I had to take the same courses, the same electives for my concentration, and I felt at the time that I kept saying, is there some amount of money I can just give you to get this degree and just move on? And I felt like at the time that my experience wasn't reflected in my schoolwork, and that in fact my education wasn't the education it should have been, because it was insufficient to where I was in the profession. And I was looking at the curriculum at Sills, which is a far better library school than the one I went to, and it is, I think, relevant, interesting, exciting, but we all know that no course really prepares you for what it's like to actually do that thing. So there's always that tension between learning about something and doing something, and that's in any profession. So is there any guarantee that the MLS actually prepares you better than any other possible option to succeed in your job? I'm not so sure. When I think about the MLS degree, I have mixed feelings, because one, that is a degree which for me defines me as a librarian. It's the degree that I can just say I'm a librarian because I have this degree. And I'm very proud of that. But then I think, how important was that degree to my being a librarian in reality? So as we talk, I have 3 things that I'm sort of keeping in mind. One, how important is any degree to defining a profession? What makes you a lawyer isn't that you went to law school, it's that you passed the bar. I want doctors that went to med school, but if you had another way of educating, of assuring competency, I mean, is having a degree that's special to your profession, is that what defines a profession, or is it something else? The other 3 things that I want to keep in mind are, it's hard for me to talk about this topic without thinking about higher education generally, and the need to sort of explode the curriculum and create a system that enables us to define curriculum based on who we are, where we come from, and what we want to learn. Also, bearing into this is the role of this degree in ranking systems that some of us may or may not have in our libraries, and I keep conflating that. Finally, I manage IT services, and in IT, traditionally, there hasn't been a degree. And in fact, we all know, those of us who manage IT, that no certification really is a good substitute for experience on the job. So in IT, we frequently hire people that have no credentials and no degrees, but can have many, many ways of demonstrating their competency. So those are some questions that I'm thinking of as we continue this discussion.
All right, so I have a couple questions to follow up, and I think, Greg, you touched on this a little bit already, but have you seen a shift over time in the MLS as a requirement for professional positions? And also, are there particular positions which you would or wouldn't include the MLS as a requirement?
I can yell.
I know, we talk loud.
Yeah.
Maybe we can just leave it
Yeah,
there.
we can try to,
Yeah?
try to leave it there and see what happens. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think I have. I think like in 1998, I think I saw Jim Neal do a presentation on like feral librarians or something like that. And it was fairly controversial at that time, and I don't think it's really that controversial anymore. Because it's not this, and we tend to do this in libraries, it's this big, dramatic, like, the MLS is dead, right? Versus, well, we're just incorporating a relatively small percentage of highly valuable skill sets into our organization, so the MLS is declining as a ratio of level, but it's still 90% of the people have it. So I think it's become at least among directors and a lot of other people, it's become less of a hot button issue and more of an accepted practice. And part of it is you're just having these people come in your organization and provide valuable skills, and then you incorporate them, and then it becomes more comfortable. The other thing is, and we never say you have to have the MLS or you don't. You say MLS or equivalent, and you leave yourself the flexibility. And you see that now more and more in job ads, and I think you're going to see that more and more. So if you had a curator who had a PhD but didn't have the MLS and lots of great skills, you could hire them. If you had a computer programmer who didn't have it but had something you could count as equivalent. It depends how you define equivalent in that scenario. But you're going to see organizations give themselves more flexibility with these positions. I haven't done a survey. It's all anecdotal, but I think I'm seeing it more. I know we use it almost every time, 100% of the time, MLS or equivalent, giving yourself the option. And I don't see why, unless you have a 10-year system where you're kind of locked into having that, I don't see why you wouldn't do that.
Can I respond to that
Yes.
one? I guess my concern really is, I mean, we continue to use the MLS as a requirement. There's some, though, that we do MLS or other advanced related degree in those things like archives, conservator, category systems, scholarly communication. But what I want to push back on as a profession is I think and stressing the importance of the academy, following the academy, is that, okay, if the MLS is our terminal degree, that is our professional degree. Then the graduate schools, sort of moving ahead to seeing, and as we help them, see what are those candidates, what do they need to have, how are we framing that? So that, because when I came out, quite frankly, when I came out of library school, I don't know that, way back there, 1978, that they did we did a very good job then in preparing me for the work that I did in libraries in serving the academy. I don't know that we did that well then, and that's where I really am interested in kind of pushing back a little bit to make sure that we're able to do that.
I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that the two top-rated programs are Illinois and Chapel Hill, and I don't know if there are any library school professors here, but it has not a lot to do with the quality of the courses in those programs. It has a lot to do with the fact that you get great graduate assistantships, and the integration between the library and the library school is really robust. So people come out of there and they go and they do really well in the profession, and then that builds a reputation. So when U.S. News and World Report does its surveys, those end up as the top-rated schools. Now, it's not to say you can't do that in other, I mean, Pitt, Syracuse, lots of places do that kind of thing, but those two do it the most with the highest percentage of their graduates, which is why I think they're the top-rated. And that goes back to Molly's point, which is it has everything to do with what you do while you're in school to blend with your education.
I mean, we all benefit in the triangle from having sales and having the option of getting interns and input, and I think you're right. That's going to be for a student just as valuable, if not more valuable, than what happens in the classroom, because it allows them to apply that knowledge in real time. And that's what you're seeing in education generally, right? A move toward more experiential education, to learning by doing and less by listening. And so this is not unique, or these questions are not unique to our profession or to this degree.
So if you were to change the curriculum of an MLS program, what would you change?
I would start by, this probably sounds really awful, but I would start by giving the students some type of assessment test, and also an assessment of what, some way of assessing what the student's interested in as well, and then design the curriculum around those strengths and weaknesses, keeping in mind what the student professes to want to, what career path the student wants to go into. So I would like to see a much more modular curriculum that somebody could design, sitting at their computer one night and taking some tests, and like a Match.com kind of. Not that I've ever done that or no.
I mean, Carol, in your opening statement, you talked about two specific instances. One was the video wall, and I can't remember what the first one was, but it was also digital in nature.
Right, it was a lab.
A lab. That's not right. A lab. So when you think about, if that was an area that you were to pursue, is that something that you would say, yes, we need somebody within MLS to bring that kind of service into our library? Or?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think there was I don't know if you all read this, our LUK report, it was from the UK on the Research Libraries UK, and they were talking about the 9 areas that had potentially the most significant skills gap, where we have the most skill gap. That's where I think the curriculum should focus. So, and like we're saying, we're talking about the University of Research Libraries. So I'm not talking about all. Preserving research outputs. 49% said that it would be essential in 2 to 5 years. It's only 10% now. Knowledge to advise on data management curation. We all know that, including ingest, all that. We've got access to dissemination, blah, 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 blah. 48% essential in 2 to 5 years. It's 16% now. Knowledge to support researchers in complying with various mandates for funders. 40% essential in 2 to 5 years. 16% now. And the knowledge to advise on potential data manipulation tools, and then data mining, preservation of project records, metadata schema. Those are the places I would put my emphasis on. And we are. I mean, actually, that's what you're saying about the top. Schools really are putting a lot of emphasis there, and so there's people coming out who are really able to provide what we need.
Yeah, I'd like to see more aggressive partnering with computer science program. I think that would be interesting. I'm always disappointed when I see, when I look at Computer Magazine or look at what's happening in computer science departments, how often they talk about search and information retrieval, and they never ever mention the work of librarians, as if it wasn't relevant. And I find that very disappointing, and that would be, given what the direction we know we're going and we are in, and it'd be nice to see some partnerships there. Some cross-listing of courses, the option to take that type of track. And maybe somebody's doing that, but I didn't see that.
Yeah, I think more technical and partnering with computer science is a great idea. And you're seeing the library schools do this. Illinois has a data program, other people, Michigan, and there are a lot of IS kind of structured programs which are really good. So I think that's a positive development. The question is, can you get people attracted to the profession? Who have like computer science degrees and things like that. I think that's a really interesting question that I haven't thought enough about. I'm not sure we've thought enough about as a profession. The other thing I would add is more for research libraries and academic libraries, more on management and actual leadership, and not the sort of generic, boring sort of management, but a little more robust program on, like, I mean, my boss went and presented to some class here, so I don't know which one it was, but I bet that was one of the more valuable 45 minutes. Or if Sarah went and talked to a library school class for an hour, that would be the most valuable hour that they've had all year, probably. So if you could somehow do more of that into the curriculum, of that kind of what it takes to really run an academic library at this point, and the kind of things people are looking for, more statistics kind of leadership classes, stuff like that, I think that would be useful for the curriculum. And I don't know, I know like the research library directors have some conversations with the deans that run the library schools, but I'm pretty sure they don't have enough. And every once in a while this topic will pop up as like a hot topic, but then it kind of fades away. So there's not enough sort of integration and conversation between what the research library deans and directors, university librarians want for their organizations and what the library schools are producing.
Yeah, I used to manage IT at the School of the Environment Institute, which offers a Master's in Environmental Management. And one of the big tensions there was always, but that's not even a degree that anybody, wants or expects or requires for anything. It's not, it was a new degree and it was not part of a profession. And so there was always this tension about this degree. Is it just a feeder of funds into the school? Is it going to prepare people to get a PhD, possibly? What kind of careers are people going to get? And I remember a discussion with our advisory board about this. They noted that we were teaching management courses in this degree while we had a business school right across the campus that is a world leader in teaching management. And it would be much more perhaps interesting or compelling to take your management piece from this school rather than from the professors that we were offering, very specialty were not in management. And so I was thinking, one of my favorite library courses was in management because that was a new topic to me. But how much more robust would have been my experience if I could have actually, it was cross-listed with the business school where I could have taken more courses. And so maybe the future of the curriculum is developing these partnerships with technology programs or business programs or entrepreneurial programs, and having a core library program that would be specific to your area of interest in libraries.
I'd like to spin off that a little bit too. It's not only in those areas. I mean, one of the things when I was trying to do it was like, will I get my master's in music first? Do I get my library degree first? Is the depth in that subject expertise that I was talking about, because when we talk about digital humanities, unless you understand the humanities and understand the disciplines and how they work out, how you're going to do text mining or whatever you're going to do, I mean, those things are really important. And I've always been really greedy because I think the MLS is important for what it does, but it's more.
That's right.
It's both and where you get that. How you put that
I
together
mean, what
is really where.
What if that had been an option in your music program?
Exactly.
Sort of spreading it into those subject areas, because we also know we have more and more specialization, and being able to extend the library environment into those areas of specialty might be a way of getting a more interesting or diverse pool of candidates for jobs. I think our candidates for jobs now are already pretty interesting and diverse, but it's sad to have to make those decisions about which degree first or the timing of it. It just seems silly.
Well, I just think about it, Duke, that, a couple of people that we've hired in the last year both have that deep subject knowledge but don't have an MLS, and we hired them because of their deep subject knowledge and that they could work in those areas. One was our digital humanities technology coordinator, and then we have a visualization specialist who has a large data background. And so, do you feel like that trend, as we move more towards these specializations, that trend is going to continue to happen, or is it hard to predict?
I think that
Yes.
I think the answer is yes. I mean, I don't know.
I think it's going to continue to happen, but what I wonder is, what is the career path for
for those staff.
That's a good question.
And that's the piece that I could, it seems to me that if you aspire to develop professionally within the libraries, they expect that MLS, at some point, or perhaps a PhD with extensive library experience. But I can't see somebody leading a university or research library without some other exceptional experience otherwise. Maybe I'm wrong, and if people have examples of that, I'd like to know. It'd be interesting.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should open it up to questions from the floor at this point. Hopefully, you have some questions. Just raise your hand if you have a question.
Do you think we're really going to end up with a two-track system? Following Molly's comment, we are really hiring our non-MLSs in specialty positions, subject positions, technology positions, and functional positions. And we still also need some generalists. And for those people who do aspire to managerial cadre, then they do need to have that library background. So do you see a two-track developing?
I think we're going to blend it more. I think it's going to end up blending more. We have an architect who's an associate director on our staff, and he's pretty much blended into leadership. Now, could he be the director of libraries? Probably not. But I don't know. It's an interesting question. But I think I see them blending in more, and you're going to see more suites of, like Molly's staff, an area of her staff where you have computer programmers and technology librarians kind of working together and blending in. Your question and her question about what's the path? Could they aspire to leadership positions? That's a really good one. I have a feeling that as it becomes more accepted and more of a presence in organizations, that they'll be able to if they want to. But you're right. Probably right now there's a little bit of a track kind of where they might be stuck, which is an interesting question to think about.
And I worry about the balance. I think, some places you're going to see what I worry about with the extreme. So it's like, well, you don't need to be a librarian because, what is the academy? It comes back to what's a library too. But that some institutions will do that, and then the other institutions will not. So I worry about our institution to institution rather than necessarily even within each institution, if that makes sense. That I think there's some that are really, saying we think here, I think, the MLS is a very important degree to have, right? We're committed to that degree. That's not true for all institutions, and so I think that might be a problem. That's why I guess I focus so much on curriculum, so that it can be what we need to be.
Yeah, Rebecca.
While I am in favor of librarians trying to gain more experience outside of just the traditional MLS curriculum, what I worry about is that gaining these experiences means more time in school or a second master's, and I do not see the salaries being. I'm graduating. I'm lucky to have a job. However, my debt from my first master's and this master's is more than my salary. So, and I hear that you're not supposed to do that. Anyway, so while I would get back my experiences, and in fact I know that my second master's helped me get a position, I worry when we talk about expecting graduates of library programs to have extensive extra schooling when the salaries are not there to support that.
Yeah, how are we going to pay for it?
Yeah, so I would, you go first.
I was going to say, well, I think that's why we have to rethink the curriculum. Because
Is it going to be longer? I mean, is it 2 years, or is it going to be?
Well, I wouldn't say we have to make it longer.
I personally think I could find places to trim. That's
That wasn't part of our deal. We weren't saying that.
Yeah, it was supposed to add. It just said add. It didn't say trim. But it's a very good point. I'll let Molly finish her answer.
well, no, I was just going to say that there's there's sort of, if you think of this Venn diagram, there's an intersection of this discipline and this one that is key to this to your position, and perhaps what's outside of that intersection is some of it is irrelevant, some of it may be, and I think that is something that you can decide or the faculty you work with. But I know that when I was on the market, I was struck by years ago how it seemed like the places that required the greatest number of degrees paid the least, and how it just seemed, messed up.
Those are going to be very good libraries, I think. Is the honest. I mean, I remember Northern Illinois required like a second master's or a PhD with their. I mean, I grew up in the Chicago area. Northern Illinois, it's in DeKalb. I mean, there's no way they're going to attract people. And they don't have a great library. And that's part of the reason why. But I think it's a very good point. So two things. One is libraries being more willing to hire people that don't have the MLS, but have skills that they really want and need, like a visualization specialist, an architect, a PR person, whatever it may be. Yeah, and then the other point I was making was, so I don't have a second master's, and not that I'm an example of anything, but I had an assistantship that helped me pay for school while I was in school, and that's what I was kind of referring to, is that combination of, now I had to go 2 years, right, when I could have finished in a year if I had just done classes, but in a way it helped me pay for school because it helped offset tuition and things like that, and I'm not intimately familiar with how it works here in Chapel Hill, but I think there are some similarities between how it works in Illinois and how it works here in terms of if you get the right assistantship to go with your schooling, it can kind of help you as a combo pack work your way through. It does keep you in a little bit longer, but I think it's worth it as opposed to requiring like a second master's outright. I don't think that's something libraries can do. Yeah, and then offer a starting salary of $34,000 or something. I mean, you just can't do that. It's not viable.
And that's what I was saying. I mean, that's about the skills, and that's what I said. In a perfect world, that's what I like. But I mean, that's what Illinois, that's what SILS is doing. I mean, the curriculum is providing that kind of depth and diversity and capability that we need, right? I mean, that's the point. That's where I see I think we need to push on it on a broader scale.
There was somebody over here that had a question. Person in the green.
I confess I'm from SILS. So I have a question for you about the people who they have a degree on the field, they're working in the library, they're looking to move ahead. Is there a role for SILS in our school? We have a certificate of advanced studies, a postmaster's. Is there a role for that kind of education, executive style education for those folks, and who's going to have to be in a distance school and have to work?
I think that's great. I love that idea.
Me too.
But I think in this area you probably wouldn't need to have a distance component considering the number of university libraries in the vicinity. But a distance component would be hugely marketable. I think that what you're speaking to there is the fact that libraries are unique places. We are, kind of weird enterprises with unique, I would say, obligations and a unique mission. And so, IT in the library isn't like IT someplace else. And so being able to provide that understanding to people who come in with that other experience, that would be wonderful.
I'm wondering, as AULs, what your perspective is of a sort of a minority trend, but a compelling trend in which the director of the library is hired from on-site faculty. I'm thinking of Michigan and Paul Caron, an economist, the direct dean of libraries at UC Berkeley, a journalism professor. In the case of the Harvard Law Library, where they basically said this library system is broken, let's put a lawyer over the library system. What is your perspective of this trend?
How do you want to do it?
I think in Paul's case that was a unique situation because he was also the former provost, so he made promises to himself that he could then cash in. That was pretty good, right? That wouldn't be bad, Sarah, right?
Well, Paul was chair of the search committee for the university librarian, and he said this, told the story himself, that he read the job description and thought, my gosh, I can do this. So he called the provost and he got the job. So I think that, I also think that the situation at Berkeley is a little bit anomalous because Berkeley was having one of its many cataclysmic budget cuts, and the position had been open for a while, and they finally offered to a couple of people. They said no, and so Joe stepped in as an interim, and things have continued to be very difficult, and he's done fine. So it's a little bit different than setting out to say, okay, we want a professor as head of the library. Harvard has its own issues about that too, and in a sense they have felt that a Robert Darnton needs to be the university librarian, and then other pieces can be operated by other qualifications. It seems like a university library turns to a faculty member for the directorship when something else is happening and a librarian is not forthcoming to step up.
And they need a lot of credibility with the faculty. Sometimes that can happen. But I suspect in all three of those situations that it was just about trying to find the best person for that point in time. And I would hope in most cases that would be hiring a librarian who's got a lot of experience running libraries really well to find the best person at this specific point in time.
Well, in IT organizations in higher ed, you see a trend of it's minority, but you see this happening where happened at MIT, where the community was frustrated with the IT service, so they downgraded the position and then brought in somebody from industry to manage the operation. And that was because they felt that it would take somebody who was proficient at doing sort of ROI and cost-benefit analyses and at transforming organizations to attend to their IT department. And I'm kind of concerned about libraries in that vein because at least from what I've read about what's happening at Harvard, there is a certain level of maybe it's not expressed directly, but you get the sense of frustration, or people want something, they're not getting it, and they're organizing to make this change happen, and I do worry that that the structures that we have set up to ensure our profession, like the degree, the faculty ranking, that those may end up preventing us from changing fast enough to meet the needs of our community. And we're very fortunate, we're really well supported, and I think the community really appreciates us. And maybe it does take some other event at your university to precipitate that. But I do worry about that a little bit, about our ability to transform and to change because of the structures we've created.
I guess that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
You had a question.
So you talked a lot about the experience-based learning in the curriculum, and as librarians we host CALAs here at UNC. We have interns and field experience students and lots of student employees, and that's great effort. We also contribute to the curriculum in another way, right? In most library schools, a lot of the core classes like cataloging are not taught by full-time faculty in the department. They're taught by adjuncts practicing librarians. So I'm wondering, based on the kind of new curriculum you've started to articulate, if you see that changing and in which direction.
So would it be more adjunct?
Yeah, I mean, what's the role for us in kind of more formal classroom teaching and in that part of the curriculum in the future?
Well, they have that professors of the practice ranking at Duke that recognizes people who have made significant contributions in their professionally, and enables them to teach in higher education. So I wonder if you'll see more like that.
I think you'll see more of it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I think you'll see more of it. It depends on the librarians you get, but I think that can be really, really valuable. The technology courses I took at Illinois, half of them were taught by librarians who were on that sort of cutting edge of things. Trying to get them in the classroom is a bit, can be a challenge, or consistently is really a struggle for the library schools. But I think it's really valuable. It's also cheaper, so there's that practical element in a sense, because your faculty doesn't have to be quite as large. But I would think that trend would continue.
Because the diversity is what I'm thinking it's going to make that.
Yeah, because
you're going to have a diverse skill set to teach, and to do that, you can't. It would have to be adjunct. It seems to me.
And I think you need both. You need both
But
to
you need
get the
both.
balance. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I've taught at Illinois through their distance program and here, and I know I was weak on some of the theoretical foundation kind of stuff, but really strong on that sort of practical. You know, the first day I went in, I said, "Who knows who Thomas Mann is?" Right? And half the people were like, "We love Thomas Mann." I was like, "I don't love Thomas Mann. Let me tell you why." And I like crushed half the group, but it kind of like rose the other half. But and then we got into this real practical discussion about it, and it was really good. And I gave them a lot of good experience about what it's like to work in a research library and build a collection in there. But I'm sure there were weaknesses in some of the foundations of teaching that I gave them. So I think you'll see that increase, but you'll see a healthy blend is the only way to do it.
And you know, we've got when we talk about you and I talk about business practice, and well, we've got to be savvier in business practice. And how are we going to get there to be savvier in business practice? You know,
Yeah, and you mentioned the certification thing, and then there's things like the TRLM Management Academy, which was created to try to get at this issue of savviness in business practices for earlier career people. Because there's a decent amount of stuff now that ARL is doing for people who are like trying to ascend to run libraries, but there's not a lot for 2 to 7 years in or whatever.
yeah, I think we could do a lot better in that category.
That's an interesting sort of whole.
A lot of questions over here.
I wanted to ask real quickly, we talked a little bit about whether the MLS is relevant to working in libraries. Okay, so you guys are all in real higher level leadership positions in libraries. What combinations of education and experience both inside and outside of the curriculum do you see as relevant and important to taking on a leadership role in the library? Or what kind of skills and experience?
Well, I don't have depth in a lot of areas, but what I think the skill set that has helped me along the way, I guess, and I do think is important, are maybe they're soft skills, but they talk about them in a lot of this literature, and that study that Mullins did. They talked to university librarians up there, and talked about what they're looking for, and a lot of it was, creativity, risk taking, analytical skills, people skills. I mean, a lot of that, one-on-one management, that kind of approach takes you. I mean, I always think that you rise to your incompetence, right? But I've always thought in my life that the real meat of our work is not done. I don't do the meat of the work of our profession and in the academy. So those things that I'm really good at, I mean, I'm proud of that, but some of that is not what I'm necessarily talking about. It's a little fuzzy, but I think that there's skills that maybe, I don't know, sometimes I think they can be taught, sometimes I think they can't. But I think they're very important, but I don't know that you get those in a curriculum. I think you get them on a job. You get them by working in life and working in, I think that's where you get those kind of skills. That's a total exaggeration on my part, but anyway.
You know, I'll personally, I would not look for any particular education. I would look for signs of success that education can sometimes suggest, but you want somebody who is an excellent communicator, who can write thoughtfully, and who can attend to things that require, you know, a lot of attention, for example. But that education doesn't necessarily guarantee any of that. Sometimes the environment you work in higher education suggests that that degree is very valuable because that's what they're doing, that's their business. And so that education is important as an indicator to your environment. That's a kind of cynical view of degree. But I think the one thing that I would say you would need in that position is to understand that management and leadership are very different. And often you get promoted because you're a good manager. And once you're in that leadership position, you've got to be a leader now, and you've got to stop managing. And I think that's what I see people missing, or assuming that because they're there, they must be good at that. And in fact, that is really a different skill set. It involves putting yourself out there, taking risks in a way that management is not. So I think that's the one distinction that I would make.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're hiring for your traits rather than skills or experience. You're hiring for risk-taking, creativity, not being tied to consensus, being willing to push things forward, stuff like that. If you're looking for one tangible thing, some amount of like managing money is probably useful as you move up, just creatively trying to make things work is probably useful. And you used to see a lot of leaders come through like the tech services line because they sort of manage money. I think you're seeing more leaders come out of different areas like Molly's area, people like Rick and people like that, more technology backgrounds, because that creativity, that risk taking is more valued as opposed to this like checklist of things that you have to have done. And anytime you see jobs like where middle management positions where they want 10 plus years of experience, and then they have this gigantic, well, you don't want to go work there, at least I don't, to immediately cross those off because they're looking for way too much of a checklist of things, and you end up with people who, can have proven they can do this X amount of things, but can they really push an organization forward and be creative and be vibrant and respond to a user community and those things that are more important than whether they've done X, Y, Z. So.
I'd say you look at Jim Collins from good to great.
Yeah.
That's
or
true
even,
for anybody. I mean, it's just true for
that's right.
anybody, anywhere. That's why I said it's not something.
But I just keep thinking about, I was interviewing for a job, interviewing candidates for a job, an IT job, not at Duke, in a different school. And I had two candidates that were finalists. One had a bachelor's, one had no college degree. And this was a system administration job. The one with no degree had 5 years of experience at Red Hat. All of his code was available. You could find it online. You could see that he could contribute to the community because all of his posts were there. You could see how he documented his work. You could see that he facilitated all types of user forums, so he obviously had good people skills. I could see all of this stuff about this guy, and where the other candidate with the degree, who also had good experience, was much more of a closed box. And I remember thinking, because I was working in a higher education institution, like, what does this mean for this degree that this guy that doesn't have it, I want him. I'll pay him more. And I just thought, this is messed up. And it turned out Red Hat countered, and the other guy was fantastic. So it all worked out. But during that process, I just thought we were in this business of giving degrees that were perhaps not going to be competitive with people who had real life experience during the same time, which would indicate these people were roughly the same age. And one had started working, software. And I don't think IT is sort of unique, but I don't think as much as it used to be.
Well, and the thing about that, we're kind of digressing, but this is the thing about recruitment, because it worries me. We have positions and we have qualifications for positions, but how do you look at those positions and ferret out the one that you need if you're boxed
Right.
into
That's
what,
right.
we've got this and this and this, and we're checking it.
And if your HR system requires
Right,
something like that.
it's really a hard balance, and,
I think libraries would be a lot better off if they hired for trades, softer trades more than they hire for checklists. I think you'll see libraries hopefully move more in that direction in the next, like now, as they need more of these skills and they can't worry about, do they have these 10 things that we've always hired for.
I was on a search committee for the organist at a large church. And it was interesting, there was a very distinguished lawyer, head of his firm, who was on the search committee with me, and everybody got in this committee and started doing the thing, all the rules and everything we have to do. He said, throw it out. He said, let these guys come in here, let's talk to them. We might want to hear them play, right? But let's just talk to them. I'll tell you who's going to be the best.
So I think we have time for one more question.
I confess that I'm from SILS too.
That's a good
That's
thing.
absolutely-
Well, I see. I mean, that's a good thing. That's a good
So,
thing.
prior to the advent of these things we call library schools and MLSs, people learn librarianship by apprenticeship. And I think a lot of the comments that you all have made, and even your question, I think is relevant to mine, which is, if you want to bring in folks who don't necessarily have the MLS and don't have the core librarianship skills, but they have your specialization, your specialized skills, can you bring them in and then you all train them in the areas of core librarianship?
That's what I love about the clear model. I mean, you're bringing in the deep, the PhD digital humanist, and you bring them in, and many of them already have gone back to library school. That's why I was saying that which comes first. I mean, sometimes, or you have sometimes you have to bring in that GIS specialist, right? So, can you then teach that and bring that up to the level that you need to be? I think
But also, would the academic library support that though? They pay for it. So you bring someone in who has, again, a specialized skills, and you're going to train them in the
I think I would want to see what that is. What is that core piece? And I think the fact that I could have a conversation about that in the afternoon. Could I have a little curriculum around that? I don't know. But I think that's a really good question. It would be interesting to try to answer that. Only to define what makes a librarian. I mean, that's kind of what defines that more than anything else.
It's a good question though. The directors and deans and university librarians want something different from the library schools. Asking them if they're willing to help support it tangibly is a really good conversation probably to have. Because I suspect if it was done right and it was sort of nimble, I suspect they probably would.
we're thinking new ways, think out of the box.
Please join me in thanking